Kia seems to be the kind of car company that wants to cover all the bases all the time. So not only do they have a complete sedan lineup in America, despite sagging sedan sales, they have 4 mid-size sedan entries in the US, your choice of front-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, or rear-wheel drive in a variety of different formats. They also have a ton of crossovers. They have no less than 3 subcompact crossovers, the Soul, the Seltos, and the Niro. Available EVs, plug-in hybrids, regular hybrids, etc. There's also a new Sportage coming out soon. It's going to be roughly the same size as the RAV4 and CR-V. We have a redesigned Sorento right here to compete very directly with the Toyota Highlander. And then we have the Telluride if the Highlander or the Sorento isn't quite big enough. That makes Kia one of the very few car companies in the world that is featuring 2 different 3-row entries, and one of the only brands in America, period, that fields 2 3-row entries as well. In the Toyota lineup, we just have the Highlander, Honda just has the Pilot, Dodge used to have a Journey and Durango. That's probably the closest corollary that we see in the Kia lineup. So if you want something that's a little bit easier to park, a little bit smaller on the outside, but still has seating for 7, that would be the Sorento. If you want to seat 8 and you want a roomier 3rd row, that would be the Telluride. If you've shopped for a Sorento in the past, the way that Kia has decided to slice their pie really thinly is important to keep in mind, because the Sorento has had to adjust its position in the lineup a little bit because the flagship Telluride is on sale now. So we don't find 4-way lumbar support, extending thigh cushions, memory seats, or things like that in the Sorento anymore. Instead, the Sorento is going for a bit more of a rugged mission and more of an on-road performance mission. So if you get the top-end trims like this, we have a turbocharged engine under the hood. We also have 255 width tires, which are some of the widest tires in the segment. The front end takes on a more aggressive look than we've seen before, and definitely more aggressive and a little bit different than we see in the Telluride. Kia has said that they want all their vehicles to look like a member of the family, but they don't want to look like scale versions of one another. We have full LED headlights. These are projector-style headlights in this model. We have an LED accent strip right there. The accent strip below the headlight functions as the turn signal, and then all the way down there at the bottom of the bumper, we have LED fog lights that are optional, and they're split into sort of 2 separate modules. Moving over to the blue Sorento, we have a slightly different grille going on. This is black in this model. The green one is an X-line trim, so that's the more off-road oriented Sorento. It has a little bit of a ride height increase, and this is more of the mainline model. This particular model is front-wheel drive, the green one is all-wheel drive. Even though I'm filming this Sorento at home, I've only had about 24 hours with the vehicle, and then it has to go on to another journalist because this is a first drive event, technically, thanks to the ongoing pandemic. So if you want the complete review, be sure and check back because hopefully I will have this for a week just as soon as I possibly can. In terms of length, this is a little longer than the outgoing model, about 1.5 inches longer at 189 inches long. This is around the same dimensions externally as a Toyota Highlander. It is a little shorter on the outside. That has confused some shoppers about exactly where the Sorento lands. Sometimes Kia will call this a compact 3-row crossover, and sometimes they've called it a mid-size 3-row crossover. This is 7 inches shorter than the Kia Telluride, and the big difference between this and the Telluride is going to be the 3rd row. It's going to be roomier in the Telluride. It's also going to seat 3, and then the cargo area behind the 3rd row, it's much larger in that larger Kia. This is about 6 inches longer than the new Hyundai Tucson, which is going to be the basis of the upcoming Kia Sportage. So this is going to slot right between the 2 vehicles in the Kia lineup. And in terms of interior dimensions, we get more combined legroom in here than we find in the Toyota Highlander or the Honda Pilot, but we get a slightly narrower 3rd row. As with the previous generation Sorento, packaging efficiency is the reason the Sorento is about the same size on the inside as some of those larger crossovers, while being a little bit more compact. We don't really have much of a bumper overhang in the rear. Things are pretty vertical back here. We see something similar up front where we have shorter overhangs than some of the competition and a fairly short hood, especially compared to something like the Pilot and the Highlander. That's because under this hood we find only 4-cylinder engines for 2021, whereas we do find V6s in the Pilot, the Highlander, and of course the Telluride. The result is a slightly boxier and a little bit more rugged appearance than we had in the last generation Sorento, but also excellent packaging efficiency. Moving to the rear, we find combination lamps, so the turn signals and the brake lights are LEDs, but the backup light that's right down here at the bottom of the bumper is an incandescent element. Sadly, the turn signals are red rather than amber. The bottom of the bumper changes based on the trim level you get. You could either end up with these sort of faux exhaust tip shapes going on, or a more traditional theme with some gray cladding down at the bottom and then a little bit more of a visible exhaust tip over here on the passenger side. Of course, regardless of which version you get, the exhaust tip is always going to be down there. The tire size in the Sorento surprised me a bit. Base versions get 235 width tires, which are a little bit wider than I had expected, and all turbocharged models are going to get wider 255 width rubber, like the ones that are on this X-Line trim. When it comes to driver assistance and safety systems, it's important to remember that the Sorento is significantly less expensive starting than the Highlander or the Pilot. And that puts this in sort of a tweener category in some people's minds. We get standard forward collision warning and autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian detection, but we don't get radar adaptive cruise control until the EX trim. The blind spot monitoring and parking sensors happen between those two trim levels in the S version. But the important thing to keep in mind is that the EX trim is about the same price as a base Highlander or Pilot. So comparably priced, you're going to find actually a bit more standard equipment in terms of driver assistance systems in the Sorento than in the Japanese competition, but in the base model you will find less. Under the hood, we find a few more engine options than we find in most of the competition. Base Sorento models will start with a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine that produces 191 horsepower and 181 pound-feet of torque. So performance is going to be substantially similar to something like a Nissan Rogue in the compact crossover segment, but you're going to get a third row in the Sorento. Fuel economy ranges between 24 and 26 miles per gallon, depending whether you get front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. All of those engines are going to be mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission. If you want a bit more oomph and you step up into the EX trim or above, then you get this 2.5-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. This produces 281 horsepower and 311 pound-feet of torque. You'll find this engine also under the hood of the new turbocharged Kia K5. Sending power to the ground is not a standard 8-speed automatic, but a standard 8-speed wet dual-clutch transmission. This is similar in design to the dual-clutch transmissions that we've seen out of the Hyundai and Kia group before, but this now employs wet clutches, more like we see in Audi dual-clutch transmissions. Thanks to the efficiency of the 8-speed DCT, fuel economy takes only a 1 mile per gallon hit if you choose the front-wheel drive model, down to 25 combined, and exactly the same fuel economy, 24 miles per gallon combined, if you choose all-wheel drive. Shortly after these engines go on sale, they're going to be joined by a 1.6-liter turbocharged hybrid system that's going to combine Kia's efficient 1.6-liter turbo that produces 177 horsepower with a 60 horsepower electric motor. That's going to give you a total of 227 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque, and 37 miles per gallon combined. Unlike the Highlander's hybrid synergy drive, the hybrid version of the Sorento is going to use a traditional 6-speed automatic transmission. So if you really like the way a regular automatic shifts and feels out on the road, you might want to take a look at the Sorento. That model is going to come as front-wheel drive only and will give you 37 miles per gallon combined. If you want high fuel efficiency and plug-in hybrid ability and all-wheel drive, that's going to happen a little bit later in the Sorento. We are going to be getting a plug-in hybrid version with a little bit more power total and an EV range. That's going to have a standard mechanical all-wheel drive system, not an all-wheel drive system like we find in the Toyota Highlander. So if you're looking for a 3-row vehicle that won't break the bank and has a plug, stay tuned because there's going to be a Sorento for that later. Because Kia already has 6 crossovers on sale in the US with more coming soon, we should talk about pricing and how the Sorento fits into this lineup. There is definitely going to be some pricing overlap between this and the new Sportage when that comes out, and also the Sorento and the larger Telluride. This will start at $29,390, so notably less than the Honda Pilot or the Toyota Highlander, because we get that base naturally aspirated engine. So you could look at this as sort of a competitor to something like a Subaru Outback with the base engine, or as a slightly roomier upgrade from something like a RAV4 or CR-V if you're shopping in that segment and you'd really like the extra practicality of a third row. At the top end, this will go on up to about $43,000, so definitely within the price range of the Telluride, but honestly less expensive than top-end trims of the competition like the Highlander or the Pilot. The logical reason for that is that the Kia Telluride exists, and that is the most expensive 3-row crossover currently in the Kia lineup. If you want the hybrid model, that's going to be between $33,590 and $36,590, so definitely a narrower price range than we find in the Toyota Highlander hybrid, and less expensive as well. In fact, the top-end version of the Sorento hybrid is going to be less expensive than the least expensive version of the Toyota. With that out of the way, let's dive back into the Sorento, keeping the price range of this model in mind. As always, towing capacity depends on the options and the engine that you select. It'll range between 2,000 and 3,500 pounds for the Sorento, 1,654 pounds if you get the Sorento hybrid. We don't know anything about the plug-in hybrid just yet. If you want to tow up to 5,000 pounds, there's a Telluride for that. That's one of the reasons that we don't see high towing capacities in this particular model. In the top-end version of the Sorento, I think front seat comfort falls a little bit versus the outgoing model. We have a 2-way adjustable lumbar support, not a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, no extending thigh cushion, and no driver's seat memory. The logical reason for that, of course, is that Kia has the larger Telluride in their lineup. We have a tilt telescopic steering column, it's manual, and it has a decent range of motion. A nice touch in this top-end trim is that the passenger seat has the same range of electric motion as the driver's seat, has the same lumbar support, and the seat bottom cushion moves in the same way. As with the previous generation of Sorento, the interior is surprisingly roomy. With the front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have about 7 inches of legroom left. The second row seats slide forward and backwards so you can apportion space a bit more equitably with the third row in the rear. In terms of combined legroom figures, you find several inches more combined legroom in the Sorento than you find in the Highlander or the Pilot, although the interior seems to be just a hair narrower in some dimensions. I really wish that Kia had sent me the model with the 3-row bench in the second row. That's the 7-seat version. This is the 6-seat version of the Sorento. It only comes in 2 ways, 6 or 7 seats. 3 seats or 2 seats in the middle and just 2 seats in the third row. If you're looking to seat 8, that's another reason that you might want to upgrade into the Telluride. Moving all the way over here to the right side, I have a decent amount of headroom, even though this model is equipped with the optional panoramic moonroof and the seat is very upright. I have about 1 inch of headroom left. Putting the seat in a more comfortable reclined position, I have several inches of headroom left and the seat reclines even further. With this generation, the second row area definitely feels more premium than it did in the past. We have USB charge ports on the front seat backs for the second row passengers, more soft touch materials and more premium materials on the doors as well. The second row passengers also get air vents on the back of the center console from the front seat. We also find some additional charge ports down there at the bottom, so the second row has a total of 3 USB ports. You'll see some of these trim details as we move up front later, but we have soft touch injection molded plastics in the upper and mid sections of the door, some stitched goods right there that match the seat. We have some faux wood trim that matches what's going on up front, and then the cup holders, rather unfortunately, are in the rear doors. We see this in a lot of 3-row crossovers. This is not my favorite place because if someone leaves their cup here and you close the door, you'll end up spilling that soda inside. Hopping into the third row is pretty easy thanks to a tilt slide second row. However, you can't tilt and slide those seats in that manner while there is a child seat latched into place. The Sorento is a little bit smaller in a lot of dimensions than the Highlander or Pilot, but they've really apportioned the space pretty easily. With this second row seat easily adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, if I lean the seat back to a more natural position there, you can see that I have about 1.5 inches of legroom left. Headroom back here is also surprisingly decent. With this third row in its upright position, I can probably put my head back there to the headrest if I needed to. If I was trying to sit in more of a natural upright position, the back of my head is just barely brushing the ceiling, but this is a pretty comfortable position, relatively speaking. Of course, you'll see the one flaw, and that is that the seat bottom cushion is slammed almost all the way to the floor. It definitely is a little bit closer to the floor than we find in the Highlander, and that's one of the reasons that we find a bit more headroom in the third row. It's not that the box is taller than what we find in the Toyota, it's simply that the seat bottom cushion is closer to the ground. When it comes to third row comfort, as long as you're not trying to squeeze 3 people across the bench of the Toyota Highlander, I would say that these seats are about as comfortable as the ones that we find in the Highlander or the Pilot. We have much more legroom in here than we find in either of those options, but we don't find quite as comfortable of a rear passenger seat because the seat bottom cushion is so close to the ground. I guess on the other hand, you could sort of cross your legs back here and be a bit more comfortable if you needed to, but it is sort of like sitting on a futon on the floor. Third row passengers get a number of storage compartments back here, cup holders on either side, and USB charge ports, but no air vents in the third row. These really are more occasional use third row seats than the ones that we find in the Telluride, where we have air vents in the rear and definitely more room for third row passengers. Kia locates the release for the hatch right here under the E in Sorento, and behind this powered hatch we find 12.6 cubic feet of cargo space. The cargo area here is a little bit more similar to the Highlander, although you will find more room in the Highlander, 3 cubic feet more than the Kia Telluride, which comes in at 21 cubic feet total, nearly double what we find in this model. The cargo area is probably the most important consideration when cross-shopping this with the larger Kia, because while you could put some luggage behind the third row in the Telluride, you can't put any 24-inch roller bags back here in the Sorento. You could fit 2 carry-on sized 21-inch roller bags just behind the third row, so even though the third row is large and accommodating as far as 3-row vehicles in the smaller end of the segment go, the cargo area is definitely going to be a downside. As with most 3-row crossovers, the third row seats are probably going to spend a lot of their time folded flat, and if you do that, we have a relatively similarly sized cargo area to the Toyota Highlander. But there does seem to be a slightly narrower distance between the 2 wheel wells because the Sorento itself is a little bit narrower on the inside. Under the load floor, we find a little bit of additional storage space. Kia puts the spare tire under the vehicle, but they do have the jack and the tire iron on the inside. When it comes to the Alex and Auto's exclusive Trunk Comfort Index score, this gets 2 out of 10 points because we do have a fairly small area right here behind the third row. Of course, if you were to put the third row forward, it would have about the same kind of room that we'd find in a Honda Passport. Maybe we'll have to try the other way. Nope, my butt's too big. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the very top end version. This is the one that's green on the outside. This is about $43,000 before tax, title, license, and destination. This has a large panoramic moonroof. As you can see, it goes to just over the second row passengers' heads. It's definitely a really large sheet of glass. All 3 rows of upholstery feature perforations in the center sections, although only the front seats are both heated and ventilated. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. The bolstering on the front seat back and bottom cushions isn't too aggressive. You can see that we have some quilting there to dress up the design a little bit. Moving over to the front doors, we find a decent percentage of soft touch materials. We have a soft touch upper section of the door, soft touch inserts right there with some stitched sections that match what's going on in the seat, and then a very soft touch armrest. Below that, at the bottom of the door, we have a large storage bin and then Bose speakers. It does appear that the Hyundai and Kia Motor Group is moving away from some of those hardened carbon sound systems over to Bose. Over on the front of the door, we have some imitation wood trim. This is really a believable form of faux wood trim, very similar to what we find in the Kia Telluride. The feel of the material is even a little bit rough like you'd find with open pore wood, but upon closer inspection you can tell the difference. That faux wood trim continues as we move on over to the dashboard, where we find a style that is somewhere between the previous generation Sorento and the Kia Telluride. Again, Kia didn't want to just have scale versions of their vehicles, so they definitely have some differences in terms of the overall style. One of the biggest differences is the air vent design that we find around this interior. We have 2 different air vents. We have one up here and then a small one down at the bottom. The bottom one just toggles side to side, and then this one moves in 4 directions. You don't get too much air out of the bottom vent unless the top air vent is all the way down there trying to direct air lower, and then air starts to come out of this vent, and then you can direct it side to side. There are 4 of those air vents, 2 for the driver and 2 for the passenger. Over on the passenger side, we find a somewhat small bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a 10-inch tablet computer inside. While we're on the passenger side, one thing that has surprised some people is that we don't have any ambient lighting in this interior, even though it would appear that it's been designed for that to happen right there under that wood trim. I'm not sure if that exists in other markets, but it doesn't exist here in the United States. There are 2 different infotainment screens available in the Sorento. There's a smaller one and then there is this larger screen. But the important thing to know is that by the time you've worked your way up to about the base price of a Highlander, this screen becomes standard. So most of the ones on dealer lots will probably have this screen. We have some touch buttons on either side of that large display, and then we have a physical power volume knob and tune knob over there on the other side. We have the controls for the climate control system below that. This is a 2-zone rather than 3-zone automatic climate control. If you want 3-zone climate control, you have to work your way up the Kia ladder. We get, again, those large air vents there. Below that, we have some similar styling to what we find in the larger Telluride with the toggles for the heated and ventilated front seats. Between the heated and ventilated seats, we find a storage area where you can easily tuck away some of those larger smartphones. There are 3 USB ports, only one of them interfaces with the infotainment system, and then there's a Qi wireless charging mat in there. We have a pretty traditional console shifter back here, manual mode over to the left down there. We push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. 3 large cup holders there, sort of a change or other odd item holder there. And then right here we have the drive mode selector for the all-wheel drive system. As we've seen in other Kia vehicles, there's a smart mode, sport mode, comfort, eco, and snow. We also have the ability to lock the center coupling in the vehicle. That's going to try and apportion power more equitably between the front and the rear. We have a button for the heated steering wheel, auto brake hold, hill descent control, electric parking brake, parking sensors, 360-degree camera system, and then a button to disable the auto start-stop system. The 360-degree camera is crisp and it's well suited to this horizontal display format. The way manufacturers decide which vehicles get which options is sometimes confusing, and one of those confusing options is over here on the driver's side, where we find an available full 12-inch LCD instrument cluster in the Sorento, something that we don't find, oddly enough, in the Telluride. The Telluride has a smaller LCD. This has a number of different themes available. There are 4 different themes to choose from, including this particular theme, which I find quite attractive. You can choose to link the themes to the drive mode, or you can select them independently of the drive mode. In the center of the display, we find readouts that are very similar to other Kia models before, so the display doesn't change quite as much with animations as we see, for instance, in a lot of Volkswagen vehicles or, of course, modern Audis. But we do have the typical trip computer readouts, tire pressure monitoring, all-wheel drive readouts, active safety, turn-by-turn navigation directions, etc. The steering wheel is a slightly different design than we've seen from Kia before. It has a split bottom spoke, paddle shifters on the back. We have up on the right and then down on the left. You'll notice this does not get the new Kia logo that has long been rumored. We don't expect to see that until next year in some of their newer models. You'll find the controls for the adaptive cruise control system over here on the right side, the controls for that multifunction LCD right here next to it, lane centering assistance right there, and then the controls for the infotainment system and phone hang-up and pickup buttons on the left. The first thing you're going to notice about the Sorento is that there is a little bit of lag because, of course, this has a dual clutch transmission. It has to engage the clutch. There's also just a hint of turbo lag. And then after that, It's very, very quick. 0 to 60 happened in the front-wheel drive trim in 6.9 seconds. I got an identical score in this all-wheel drive model, even though the all-wheel drive model has a bit more loss and it's a bit heavier. The main reason for that is that there is so much torque happening that the front-wheel drive model spends a decent amount of its time spinning its front tires. If I were going to get the 2.5 liter turbo, I would definitely get all-wheel drive because it fixes the other thing that I noticed in the front-wheel drive model, and that is torque steer. It really makes the Sorento feel much more collected out in your favorite winding mountain road like this, and I think it's much better suited to the nature of this engine. As I said before, all Sorentos have wide 255 with tires on them, so this model handles really, really well. This is probably one of the best handling models in this segment, compared even against vehicles that have a torque vectoring rear axle like the Honda Pilot. Now, the Honda Pilot will push the rear end out a little bit more, so if you're really driving it hard out on your favorite winding mountain road, you'll feel the rear end rotate a little bit more like a rear-wheel drive vehicle, but in terms of neutral handling, I think this improves over that Pilot. One of the reasons I was surprised about the tire size on turbo Sorentos is that wider tires improve handling and stopping distance, but they, generally speaking, have a negative impact on efficiency, and efficiency hasn't exactly been Kia's forte. Speaking about stopping distance, in this model I stopped in 114 feet. That's definitely a very good stopping distance for a 3-row vehicle. This is certainly shorter than the last Highlander that I drove. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to test the base model with the 235 width tires. I would expect that model is going to be relatively similar to the Highlander and the Pilot, so probably somewhere around 120 to 125 feet. On the subject of tires and handling, this has the same size tires we find in the Mazda CX-9, although the Sorento is a considerably smaller vehicle on the outside and lighter as well. There isn't as much feedback from the front tires as we find in the Mazda CX-9, but the Sorento feels definitely smaller, tighter, nimbler, and lighter out on the road. This definitely is more fun than that Mazda. If you're driving the front-wheel drive model, it is just as fast, but there is so much torque coming from this engine. Torque steer is really an important thing to keep in mind. Out on a rougher road like the one that I'm on here, the ride quality between the X-Line and the non-X-Line trims is actually pretty similar. I'd expected the X-Line trim to be perhaps a little bit softer, but instead Kia decided to tune them pretty similarly, even though we get a little bit of extra ride height in this model. That means that arguably the Sorento is still a little bit more focused on on-road driving rather than off-road driving, because if you were out on a really rough trail with this vehicle, the suspension tune could be a little bit tiring. But I think it's a reasonable balance for people that live a little bit further off the beaten path. This has over 8 inches of ground clearance, so it is respectable in this segment for sure. Likely thanks to the wider tires, we get a little bit more road noise in here than I was expecting. A little bit more road noise than we find in the Telluride, or the Highlander, or the last Pilot that I drove. Again, I haven't been able to drive the base engine model with the narrower tires, or the hybrid or plug-in hybrid versions. I wouldn't be surprised if those ended up pretty similar to the Highlander and Pilot because the tire size is a little bit closer to what we find in the Toyota and the Honda. Fuel economy is also a little bit difficult to talk about because I haven't been able to drive this too long, but so far over a day of mixed driving, I've been averaging just over 24.5 miles per gallon. Essentially, that's right in line with what the EPA says this should be getting. I noticed that highway fuel economy is especially good with this 2.5 liter turbocharged engine, and in-city driving is pretty similar to most of the V6 competition. When comparing this against the V6 competition, again, the dual clutch transmission is important to keep in mind. So if I come to a complete stop here and then I floor it, you'll notice there's a little bit of weighting and then a lot of shove. That's not turbo lag. Some people have assumed that's turbo lag that I've talked to. That's most likely the transmission engaging the clutch pack to get you going. The vehicle doesn't want to burn out the clutch, so it's going to try and slip the clutch gently, and then once it's engaged and you're moving, then you're going to get all the shove. Wet dual clutch transmissions like this are a bit of a compromise. They give up efficiency for improved driving dynamics. So slow and go and stop and go maneuvers in this transmission are definitely a lot smoother, although you can still tell the difference between this and a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. But on the other hand, they're going to be a little bit less efficient than if the same design used a dry clutch. The other benefit to the wet clutch design, generally speaking, is going to be improved cooling. 7-speed DCT that we find in the Kia Seltos and a number of other Kia and Hyundai models can overheat if you're really abusing it in off-road type situations. So if you're trying to climb up steep slopes at really slow speeds, those DCTs can have some problems. Likely this transmission is going to overheat before a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission, but it's going to be a lot less than we find in a traditional dry clutch setup. I have to say I wasn't expecting the Sorento to be as sporty as it is. The new 8-speed DCT and 2.5 liter turbo engine are definitely a lot of fun together, and then Kia put surprisingly wide tires on this model, also something I wasn't expecting because Kia has been really focused on improving their fuel economy numbers, and logically the fuel economy of this could have been a lot better if they had stuck narrower tires on it. This engine produces similar power and similar torque to the engine that we find in the Mazda CX-5 Turbo. But that CX-5 is saddled with an older 6-speed automatic transmission that's just not as engaging. It also really has some downsides when it comes to acceleration. And the CX-5 Turbo also has surprisingly narrow tires, mainly because of fuel economy concerns. Bottom line, if you're looking for something that has 3 rows but drives a lot smaller out on the road and is a surprising amount of fun, the Sorento should definitely be on your list. For 2021, the Sorento is going to start at $29,390, and these should be on dealer lots by the time you're watching this video. The hybrid will happen a little bit later. That's going to start at $33,590. That's going to get you the S trim of the hybrid, and the most expensive hybrid model is going to be the EX at $36,590. Compared to a number of its direct competitors, the Sorento has a narrower pricing range. It's also a little bit narrower than we've seen in the past for the Sorento, mainly because the Telluride now exists. So absolutely fully loaded, you'll end up right around $43,000. This particular model is just under $43,000 before tax, title, license, and of course destination. If you're looking for a 3-row crossover and you want something that's a little bit more affordable than a Pilot or a Highlander and you don't mind giving up a little bit of acceleration, the base engine in the Sorento is just fine. The acceleration is going to be substantially similar to the average compact crossover like a RAV4 or CR-V, but you're going to get the extra 3rd row and a lot more room on the inside. Working your way up the trim ladder, the EX trim is where we find the 2.5-liter turbocharged engine for $34,990. That's only about $100 more than an absolute base Toyota Highlander, and you get more equipment in the Sorento EX for that price. You also get more performance. Thanks to the 8-speed dual-clutch transmission and the turbocharged engine, this goes 0 to 60 faster than the Highlander. It's actually one of the faster entries, whether you want to call this a compact 3-row crossover or a mid-size 3-row crossover, it doesn't really matter. This is still going to be faster with the 2.5-liter turbo than pretty much anything else out there. Of course, there are a few downsides to the 2.5-liter turbo. Low-speed crawl situations are certainly not as smooth as a traditional automatic, so not as smooth as the base engine and base transmission, because the base engine, remember, gets a regular 8-speed auto, the 2.5-liter turbo gets the 8-speed dual clutch. On the other hand, we get the efficiency improvement thanks to the dual clutch transmission, and of course the performance improvement with that swift 0 to 60 time. The pricing of the Sorento hybrid also surprised me because I had expected this to be priced an awful lot closer to the Highlander hybrid, and instead this is several $1,000s less expensive. Now it is a little bit less powerful than the Highlander hybrid, although based on the hybrid system design and what we've seen out of Kia's hybrids before, I would expect real-world performance to be pretty similar between the two models. Fuel economy is definitely excellent, 37 miles per gallon combined. The one downside is you can't get all-wheel drive with the hybrid system. You will be able to get all-wheel drive with the plug-in hybrid. In fact, the plug-in hybrid is going to come only with all-wheel drive, but that's going to be a little bit later. On the other hand, it's going to be the only plug-in hybrid in this particular segment. It's also going to be one of a very select list of 3-row plug-in hybrids available, and an even smaller list of 3-row plug-in hybrids with a traditional mechanical all-wheel drive system, not an e-all-wheel drive system like we find in the Highlander hybrid. Be sure and hit that subscribe button down there so you can be updated on all of my latest videos, including a full review of the Sorento coming up just as soon as I can get my hands on one of these for a complete week. Bottom lining this for the moment, I think, is pretty easy. If you like the large grown-up K5 styling, this definitely looks more like the K5 than the Kia Telluride up front, then the Sorento is quite simply one of the best 3-row crossovers available. It's going to be a little bit easier to park, a little bit less expensive than a Highlander or a Pilot, and actually give you more room on the inside, as long as you don't need that 8th seat. If you do, then of course there's the larger Kia Telluride. And I think the real biggest competitor for this is the Telluride sitting right there on Kia lots, because there's a great deal of price overlap between these two models. Now obviously this is going to start less than the Telluride, but it's going to have less power under the hood. By the time you've worked yourself up into the 2.5-liter turbocharged model, performance is substantially similar to the Telluride. It's going to be a little bit quicker, a little bit more nimble, but the difference is not enormous. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section, and what would you choose if your own money were on the line. I think at the moment I would pick this model over the V6 version of the Highlander. The Highlander hybrid is really an attractive option, so I think I'm going to have to wait and see exactly what the Sorento hybrid and plug-in hybrid are like, but I do really love that Highlander hybrid. I would take either of those options, however, this or the Highlander over the current generation Honda Pilot. Let me know what you think about that down there, and of course, stay tuned for the full video. Find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.